Hello everyone, my name is Anupama and I welcome you once again to Nagesh Kharasgi Orchid School channel. I am here to teach you a lesson in English for grade 9 and the lesson number is 6, Weathering the Storm in Ersama. My dear children, we have already started with this chapter explanation. We have done with 2 episodes and today we are going to deal with the 3rd episode of this chapter. So before we continue with the further chapter, I would like to recap everything whatever we have studied till now. My dear children, as the topic itself tells us, weathering the storm. I told you weathering is nothing but to face some difficulty. Here the difficulty what we are going to talk about, the people, those they have suffered, they have faced, that is the storm. Now, even I told you in the year 1999, there was a catastrophic super cyclone that slammed Odisha state on 27th of October 1999. The intensity of this super cyclone was so harsh, so strong that it destroyed many villages. It swept away many houses. It killed thousands of people. This is a record that somewhere 10,000 people were killed in this super cyclone. More than 2.5 lakh animals died, as well as 3.5 lakh villages got destroyed. The devastation of this super cyclone was so terrible, so horrible that the people were left out in surprise. They had no option just to watch the devastation that was created by this super cyclone. Probably this natural calamity was one of the largest super cyclone that is recorded in the last century. So here in the story we are going to see a real account in the year 1999 what happened with the people, those are the survivors, those who witnessed this deadliest cyclone. So we started with one of the story of Prashant, who is the main character of this account. Not only Prashant, but there were many people who faced this challenge. But now what I told you, that Prashant is a boy who is hardly 19 years old. So we have already started with his story, what happened with him. He had been to one of his friend's house from his village. He actually stayed in Kalikuda and he left to Ersama, which is 18 kilometers away from his village. He just wanted to pay visit to his friend and he had been there that evening. That evening means the evening when the super cyclone slammed Odisha state. So the evening when he had been with his friend, when he was enjoying the evening, he could see that the dark clouds gathered all of a sudden in the sky. And then it started raining, it started pouring like anything. The winds rushed with the speed of 350 kilometers per hour. And all of a sudden, the whole evening when it rained, when the whole village was filled with flood water, and we could even see that the flood water was covered in brown color. So this devastation continued for next 36 hours. 36 hours means probably somewhere 1.5 days. Prashant as well as Prashant's friend's family, they had to take refuge, that is the shelter what we call, on the rooftop of Prashant's friend's house. Prashant's friend's house was the only house which was made of brick and cement. Probably we call it as a pakka house. So the reason, because of this construction, this building, Prashant's friend's building, could withstand the gushing speed of the wind, which was somewhere 260 kilometers per hour. And then after, when this super cyclone continued devastating everything whatever came in its way, Prashant as well as the whole family of his friends, they were sitting on the rooftop of their house and simply watching this devastation. They sat there, they fed themselves on the coconut fruit that, like when the cyclone came, when the cyclone hit, many of the olden trees even got uprooted. Initially, when the coconut tree, when it got uprooted and when it fell on Prashant's friend's house, they thought that this is the misfortune. But this coconut tree or the coconut fruit itself helped them to feed themselves on it for next 22 days. Later on, then the rain ceased, as well as the level of the water started to come down. Then that was the third day when Prashant thought that he should leave that place, because he had come all alone, all way long, 18 kilometers away from his village. As I told you, this super cyclone slammed complete entire Odisha state. So it was quite obvious that whatever the villages were there, they, like the block headquarters or the districts, they all got destroyed. So it was quite obvious that even Prashant's village must have faced the same challenge. So there was a big question and a big difficulty in front of Prashant, that where his family is, how are the members of the family doing. So for 2 days somehow he could restrain his emotions, his patience. But for the third day, anyhow, he decided now he is going to take his difficult expedition, that's the journey I told you. So on the third day, he started his journey to go back, to return to his village Kalikuda. He was accompanied with a sturdy stick. I told you sturdy is nothing but something which is very strong. The purpose to carry this sturdy stick was very clear, that the whole entire, all the villages were completely filled with flood water, cyclone water. And that's the reason this journey of Prashant would be the most difficult journey ever he had in his life, because it was so difficult to make out the road, to pass on that and to reach the village properly. So the reason this sturdy stick helped Prashant to find out the road in between. So slowly he started with this journey to walk towards his village. And then we could see that while he was passing through different villages, there were two friends of his uncle. They even were going to the same village. So they all three together met and they decided to move ahead. While they were moving slowly, the scenario or the situation was getting so macabre, that is, the situation got very worsened. Very terrible, horrible it was. The reason why, because while they were walking, they had to, somewhere they lost their way and they had to swim in between. And while they were wading, while they were swimming, on their way they came across many dead human bodies. Not only human bodies, but as well as the carcasses of the cattle, dogs, goats, everything. And while they were swimming, they had to take away those dead bodies on their way, and then they had to make the way and move further. So the reason this condition, I am sure, my dear children, if you even imagine, you feel really very depressed, very sad. And then the way he was approaching, he was nearing his village, the condition became more worse, because whatever the villages he passed by, all the villages were completely destroyed. Hardly in every village he could see 1 or 2 houses, those were of pakka house. So the reason those cement concrete houses could withstand this super cyclone. Otherwise, all the villages were entirely engulfed with this super cyclone, by the super cyclone. So the reason now, as the way he was nearing his village Kalikuda, he was pretty sure that his family must have died. And finally he reaches his place, his village Kalikuda. When he reaches there, what he could see from the distance place, that once upon a time when his house stood in that corner, particular corner, he could see that there were only remnants of the rooftop of his house.
All the belongings of the family members, they were somewhere entangled in one of the branch. And looking that scenario, Prashant started crying, he started yelling like anything, because he thought that it's of no use now. Probably his family is no more alive. And then just for a chance, he thought that he should go to one place and see that if his family is there. And where he reaches at Red Cross shelter. I told you, my dear children, what is a Red Cross shelter? It's a charity institution or an organization. That organization comes to different places whenever such calamities, such natural calamities occur, some epidemic, some distraction, some disaster takes place. So this organization probably helps people to get the shelter, get the food, build some dispensaries where they can wound their whatever the injuries they have suffered from. So this organization itself is a charitable organization. So finally he thought that once he should go to the Red Cross shelter and see if his family members are there. So now we will continue further with our today's session. So I request all my dear children to open page number 39 in your Moments textbook, and I hope you are with complete attention. Be with pen or pencil in the hand, so that I am going to read the chapter and explain you the difficult word meaning along with that. So let's continue, my dear children. I'll just read few lines that I have already explained in the early episode. Eventually, Prashant reached his village Kalikuda. His heart went cold. His heart went cold means he was frightened. He was terrified. Where their home once stood, there were only remnants of its roof. Some of their belongings were caught, mangled and twisted in the branches of trees just visible above the dark waters. Young Prashant decided to go to the Red Cross shelter to look for his family. Let's move further. Among the first people he saw in the crowd was his maternal grandmother. So my dear children, that's a good news for Prashant, that when he had been to this Red Cross shelter, that's the charitable organization, the one which organizes food, the one who organizes dispensary and everything. Wherever there is disaster, wherever there is calamity, this organization arranges all things for these people. So when he had been to this place was completely crowded. And in the whole crowd, first he could see that it was his maternal grandmother. Now whose maternal grandmother? His mama's mama. Maternal is our mama's mama, maternal grandmother. Weak with hunger, she rushed to him, her hands outstretched, her eyes brimming. It was a miracle that they had long given him up for dead. So now my dear children, please do underline this word, maternal uncle, the one who is your mama's mama. And how she was weak because they did not have food for continuous 2 days. So she was weak because of hunger, because of starvation. And at the moment when Prashant's grandmother saw that Prashant is very much alive, she was weak. She was weak because of hunger. But all of a sudden she rushed towards him. Her hands outstretched. Underline the word outstretched is nothing but to extend. The moment when Prashant's grandmother saw Prashant, she was so happy to see him, though she was very weak because of starvation. But looking at Prashant, all of a sudden she extended her both the hands. Her eyes brimming is nothing but her eyes were full of tears. It was a miracle. It was just as a lucky thing for the whole entire family. They had long given him up for dead. Underline this complete statement, my dear children. They had long given him up for dead means what? Even As the way Prashant thought that his entire family must have not survived this catastrophic disaster, even the family of Prashant, they even thought that probably Prashant, who had been to Ersama, even he must have met with the same fortune, met with death. So both of them thought the same for each other, but the moment when they saw each other, that was the real lucky thing, lucky incident, that was the miracle for both them. And then quickly word spread, and his extended family means what? The family members were dispersed at distant places, gathered around him and hugged him tight in relief. In relief means what? They were in less worry. That means what? Not only his maternal grandmother, but his entire family, the whole family was alive, and they were okay, they could survive this catastrophic effect. And then the moment the word spread means what? The moment when the crowd came to know that Prashant has returned back from Ersama to Kalikuda, the whole village, they all got to know this, and quickly the news, the message passed from one to another, and the entire family that was dispersed at different place, they all got together and they embraced, they hugged Prashant tightly, and they were now set with that worry. They were left with that worry. They were less worried now. Then Prashant anxiously is nothing but worryly, scanned means to see, to observe. The motley is nothing but very desperate crowd. Battered group means what? The group which was being injured because of this catastrophic effect. His brother and sister, his uncles and aunts, they all seem to be there. So now we could see that in his family, he had one grandma, as well as he had brothers and sisters, uncles and aunts, everybody. He could see that. Everybody were very much alive. But the moment when he came to his village, what did he see? This is very important, my dear children, in this chapter, that Prashant anxiously means what? He was so much worried, he was so much terrified at the sight. What was the sight? That he scanned. He saw something. What he saw? That the motley battered group. So now, my dear children, you can simply imagine that if there is any particular place like Ersama, like Kalikuda, and when this deadly disaster takes place, the things has happened, everything has happened, but later on, how the scenario would be? There are many people, those are now homeless, they have lost their shelter, they are starving because of hunger, they don't have anything to eat. Probably they have lost their children have lost their parents, and the gushing wind was of that speed, and so the reason we even can see that there were many dead bodies, those were floating on the flood water. But at the same time, the people, those who were the survivors, those who witnessed this catastrophic effect, we can imagine that even they must have got injured, they must have got hurt. So particularly talking about this word motley battered group, that means what? The entire group that survived this catastrophic effect, the faces particularly talking about, or the appearances talking about those people, those kids, small children, they were so sad, disappointed, they were injured, they were hurt, and they had no option. They don't know now what to do, where to go, who's going to help us. They have lost their beloved ones. So the moment when Prashant reached, luckily when he found that his entire family was very much alive. But what about those other people? Those are there in the crowd, those are there in that red coat shelter. He could see that the faces of his very own villagers, those people, they were varied in appearance. They were so much disappointed. They had no option. They did not know what to do now next. So, by the next morning, as he took in the desperate situation, desperate is nothing but something which is very sad, which is very saddened, which is very upset. If anybody would go there, definitely you will be very disappointed looking at that scenario. So by the next morning, as he took in the desperate situation in the shelter, he decided to get a grip over himself. My dear children, please do underline this phrase, to get a grip over himself means what? To decide to do something for others. So yeah, that was a desperate situation. That was a scenario where everybody's heart would sank. But now, the things have happened, now you cannot change anything. You have to come over that. So Prashant was the one who decided, now it's all done, now we cannot do anything, but we have to look further, we have to take some major steps wherein we can come across these things, we can come over this challenge. So he decides something, to get a grip means he decides to do something for others. And then what he decides? He sensed means what? He perceived. He got an idea. A deadly grief settling upon 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. Please do underline this line. He sensed a deadly grief settling upon 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. So what was the count of the people, those who were residing in that Red Cross shelter? Somewhere 2,500 people were there. And how the people were there? They were, what he sensed, who? Prashant said that there was deadly grief. Deadly grief is nothing but there was immense grief, tremendous, enormous grief of the people that was settling means what? These all, the whole entire crowd of 2,500 people, they all were in immense grief. The reason is quite clear, because many of them have lost their beloved one. They have lost their houses, they don't have shelter to live now, to continue their life. Everything they had lost, and now they are starving because of hunger. So 86, now what was the devastation, particularly talking about Kalikuda place? 86 lives were lost in the village. So somewhere 86 people died in Kalikuda. All the 96 houses had been washed away. So even 96 houses had been washed away. It was their 4th day at the shelter. So right from the super cyclone, this was the 4th day, wherein the total count of the dead people was somewhere 86, and 96 houses were swept away by the super cyclone. And now it was the 4th day where the whole entire crowd of 2,500 people were taking shelter in this Red Cross organization. So far they had survived on green coconuts, but there were too few to go around such tumult of people. Please do underline the word tumult of people. Tumult, when it comes to tumult is what? I'll explain you. Now, since the super cyclone slammed this state, all these villages all were homeless, they lost their beloveds, we know everything had happened now. Now this grief, now this saddened scene we can see everywhere around the whole entire state of Odisha. And now when the super cyclone occurred, at that time, hardly, there were almost 2 to 3 days wherein people did not get any food to eat. So they were starving because of hunger. But somehow at that moment when the super cyclone was still creating its effect, it was still very much alive in all those villages. The people in those villages, they survived themselves on the green coconuts. As like we even have seen at the initial part of lesson, that when Prashant and his friend's family, they refuged, they took shelter on the rooftop of the house. That coconut tree which got uprooted, and the coconut tree that was, something fortune in disguise. I even told you the meaning of that. Why it was? Because they fed themselves on those coconut fruits for those 2 days. Herein also in this village we can see that those coconut trees that got uprooted because of this super cyclone, but luckily the people could get those green coconut fruit, and so the reason they could survive for at least 2 days. But now there was a big challenge for Prashant. What was that? That there were too few. Means initially the coconut trees or the fruit that had fallen on the ground, probably that was sufficient for the people initially. But later on, when the quantity of that coconut fruit was getting reduced, it was too few, means it was too less to go around means to fill the stomach of all those 2,500 people in the crowd. So such a tumult of people means what? Tumult is nothing, my dear children, is something, confusion or the loud noise or voice especially caused by a group of people. And why this noise, why this, there is a large sound in that group? Because probably those people are hungry, they are going starved, they are because of starvation, they are angry, they are sad, they are disappointed, they are desperate, they are hungry now. So the reason those coconut trees or the fruits would not help them anymore, or probably it was not in that large quantity. So now what Prashant does next, we will see. Prashant of all 19 years. So this is very important, my dear children. Prashant was only 19 years, he was a teenager, decided to step in as a leader of his village, if no one else did. So the moment when he saw all this scenario, what was the scenario? That the people were sad, they were desperate, they were dispersed, their appearances, their facial expressions were completely turned away, and they were all disappointed, and then they did not have sufficient food to fill their bellies, to fill their stomach. So Prashant, who was hardly of 19 years old, he thought that I must come up with some idea, not else other, I should not wait for anyone, but I myself voluntarily I should get up and I should do something for my villagers, for my people. And then what he does, he organized a group of youths. Youths means what? The people of his same age. He organized a group of youths and elders to jointly, elders means those are the elder people, jointly pressurize the merchant once again to part means to give away or to distribute with his rice. So what he decided, that those coconut fruits, those are not sufficient for this entire group of 2,500 people. So he himself voluntarily got up, he decided something, and he arranged the group of youth as well as the elderly people, and elderly means the older people, and they pressurized is nothing but to put pressure or forced the merchant is nothing but the vendor or the one who sells grocery. So merchant once again to give with rice. So obviously they needed to have a concrete sort of food wherein they can fill their stomach, and then they get some energy, because they were weakening day after day. So he thought that all together they'll form a group and go to the merchant and they'll pressurize to give the rice. This time the delegation is nothing but the task, something which you have decided. This time the delegation succeeded, they were successful and returned triumphantly means what? With victoriously, wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. So now what had happened, like the moment when this group of Prashant and all those youth as well as the elderly people, they all together went to merchant, and when they pressurized this merchant to give away some part of rice, this time in this task they were successful. And then they returned successfully when the water was receding, that means it was reducing, and they came up with the food, and they got with the food for the entire shelter. Now in this session, in this episode, what we could see, that Prashant, who had been away 18 kilometers from his village, finally he reaches his Kalikuda place. Initially he had taken up his family as dead, but he was so lucky, he was so fortunate that he could come across the entire family, those that was safety. They had refused themselves in Red Cross shelter. And then even he could see the misery, I mean the worst condition of his villagers with their facial expressions, with their appearance. They were starving because of hunger, and Prashant, who was only 19 years of old, he thought that why to wait for others, I should take the initiative, I should voluntarily come up with some idea. And then he got done with the group of youth and elderly people, and then he got some rice for the whole villager. So in this session we have done till here. I hope you have understood as well as underline those words as well as phrases. As I have told you, those couple of sentences are equally important in that lesson. So in the next chapter we shall continue what happens next, and whether Prashant and the villagers are they are okay to come back out of this worst situation. What happens, we will see everything in detail in the next episode. Till the time, take care of yourself. Bye bye and thank you.